Ichimon Japan is made possible by Patreon support. If you would like to make sure that we can keep bringing you more content like this, then head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month.
What if his ghost showed up with the shell? Like, I died, but look, I got it. Marry me.
Well, it's like, you're an alien, I'm a ghost. I think we can make this work.
I feel at that point she'd be like, well, you did die for me.
Yeah. Welcome to Ichimon Japan. I'm Tony and
I'm Ryan.
So, Ichimon means one question, and every episode of this podcast, we ask one question about Japan. Today's question is the story of Kaguya Hime proof that aliens have visited Japan? All right,
Nakon Taketori Monogatari, eh?
Well, we'll get into the problems with the titles, but all right. So we are talking about, like Ryan said, the story that is most commonly known in Japanese, at least, as Taketori Monogatari, and that means it's often translated as the tale of the bamboo cutter. I saw one translation as the tale of the bamboo hewer.
Ooh.
Hewer, yeah.
I mean, he should be the bamboo taker. Or gatherer.
Bamboo taker, it could be. I'm a bamboo hewer. That's my job. Anyway, this is a very old story.
You joke, but like my students would look that up in a dictionary and think that's just a completely normal word.
Yeah.
Like this weekend I went hewing, and I would just be like, what?
Hewing? Hewing bamboo? Don't you hew bamboo? It's like, what does that even mean?
I can't think of the example, but this has literally happened at least a dozen times where they look up some obscure ancient word and assume it's normal and just use it as if it's normal.
Yeah. Guys, stick to around like the first or second translation in a dictionary usually.
Yeah, so advice in case you're learning Japanese. My students do this a lot, and I always ask them why. Is like they look up a word, and they just don't like the first entry for some reason. So they skip down to like the fourth or the fifth. And like, oh, I don't know, it looked easier to spell, or it was like kakui or something like. But and it, of course, some very bizarre. Like if you wanted to look up cut, and instead you went with hue or something.
Yeah. So in Japanese it's called the Taketori Monogatari, or sometimes.
I just remembered one. If you want an example.
Oh yeah. All right.
I had a student who didn't want to use the word love for some reason, so he would use dote.
Dote. Oh man.
But he would just use it as if it's love, like yeah. I dote my girlfriend. I dote this movie.
Oh man, Ryan, I totally dote you.
Thank you.
Anyway, so the story is called Taketori Monogatari. I guess that's the official name of the story, but even in Japanese, sometimes you hear it called Kaguya Hime.
Because it is the Kaguya Hime Monogatari.
It really is more about her than the titular Taketori Monogatari, who is a bamboo cutter. So let's go through the kind of short version of the story, and then we'll flesh it out after that. But the really, really short, condensed version is one day this guy goes to the bamboo grove or forest or whatever to cut some bamboo in order to make stuff and I guess sell it.
No, he just likes bamboo. He collects it.
He just collects, man. Bamboo's growing all over the place, and it's really that you're gonna get quite a collection pretty quickly. And then he finds maybe it's a baby, maybe it's a tiny human, like a tiny adult that's like 9 centimeters tall. San sun. It's this old unit of measurement called the sun is roughly the equivalent. 3 of these sun are roughly the equivalent of 9 centimeters. So he finds one of these shining inside a bamboo, takes it home, and him and the wife end up taking care of it. It grows up in like 3 months, and then it turns into this beautiful, they call her a princess, even though technically she's not, as far as they know.
And that's the end of the actual guy the story's named after.
Yeah. And then after that, this Taketori guy, the bamboo cutter, doesn't really have much of a role in the rest of the story, which is why we're saying it's really more of a story about the Hime, the princess, the Kaguya Hime, this being that he finds in the bamboo grove.
I just want to confirm the Momotaro episode has already been posted, right?
Oh, yeah. That's
okay, so hopefully they've seen that. Because this would be the equivalent if the Momotaro story wasn't called Momotaro, but it was just called, like, Old Lady in the River story.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting. Both stories, finding these abnormally birthed magical children.
There's actually a horror movie I saw recently that was kind of about that.
Oh, really? Like just finding a random...
Well, because it's a fairly common trend in like old traditional stories, and their theory was that like back in the day, having a mouth to feed was difficult, so lots of parents just literally abandoned their kids, and sometimes people would find them and just be like, "Oh, the gods must have given me this child," and really, just one of their neighbors just like threw it out. So she grows up, and then all the men go crazy for her because she's so beautiful. And then, a bunch of guys come and they start asking to marry her, and she rejects all of them. And then even the emperor gets involved, but she rejects him. And then eventually she starts crying one day looking at the moon because apparently she somehow, all of a sudden she reveals that she's actually from the moon. Somehow she remembers that.
Yeah, somehow all of a sudden she remembers this, or at least that's the way the story... It implies this, that she just suddenly reveals this, so I guess she suddenly remembers it, and she has to return to the moon, and then the moon people come to, they're called Tenjin, like heavenly people, or people of the heaven, something like that.
But they're bunny rabbits, and they live on the moon.
Yes, we'll get into that. So the moon people come, and the emperor tries to stop them with his soldiers, but it doesn't work out. The moon people just totally... They basically make everybody either fall asleep or just freeze, and then they take her away. And
moon magic.
Yeah, they take her away back to the moon. And this is where some interpretations end, but there are other interpretations or other versions with an kind of epilogue to the story. And let's get into that epilogue a little bit later, but let's go into the history, and then we'll start to pick this apart a bit more and kind of get into some of the details of some aspects of this story. So as far as we know, at least all the evidence seems to suggest that this story is the oldest monogatari, the style of fiction in Japan, and it dates back to perhaps the late 900s or early, the early 10th century, late 9th century. So that would be late 800s, early 900s. Yeah. So that's, pretty old. That predates, for example, the most famous, fiction story, which is Genji Monogatari. That may be the most famous historical
You have
fiction.
To be technical because it's the oldest one that was written as a novel because, like, epic poems go back farther. Right.
Yes.
I mean,
so, of course...
what is it? Tale of Gilgamesh also exists and would be considerably older.
Yeah. I'm just talking in Japan, I didn't even start looking into...
I do believe people generally think that Genji is like the first novel ever.
Yeah. No,
like
I have seen it described as that, yeah. So this story is very old, but as far as anybody knows, there's no original version of this story that exists. Maybe it's hidden in somebody's attic, I don't know, but as far as the public knows, there's no records of this.
I mean, there's probably like an oral story for a long time.
It could be. It very well could be. And there's just no way to know at this point. But
there is time machines.
Time machines, yes.
Let's go.
Let's do it. So the oldest known, manuscript or version of this story seems to date back to 1592, which is significantly later, 600 years at least, it seems. So a lot can happen in that time. This story can change a lot, and we have no way of knowing what the older versions are. And I think that some of the kind of weird inconsistencies in the story are at least in part due to that. But so we have this old story. We don't know who wrote it officially. There's speculation about certain nobles of the time of the Heian period because, for example, there's mentions of certain people and there's examples of waka poetry. So you would have had to have been like a noble, some kind of, aristocrat to be able to write about these things. Most likely a man because the story was likely written in kanji and men used the kanji back in those days. So there's little, fragments of evidence that suggest certain people. There's certain theories, but nothing is proven for sure.
Maybe she was just a normal Chinese woman and they assumed she was like special because she could read kanji.
Oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah, true. Because Kaguya Hime, I guess she's reading kanji too. She's probably writing kanji too.
She's reading kanji. She must be from the celestial realms. Like, no,
she's
I'm
a
from
witch.
China.
She's a witch.
Everyone can do it where I'm from. What's the big deal?
Yeah. Huh. Okay. So, also, some people call it the oldest story of science fiction, Japanese science fiction.
If you're very liberal with that definition.
Yeah, because like we said, you have this strange being that all of a sudden says, I have to go back to my planet now, which in this case is the moon. And then aliens, quote unquote, come and take her back. So now we're going to get into whether we agree with that interpretation or not. And that'll be in the second half. But let's get into some of the kind of peculiarities of this story and kind of pick it apart, because there's so many interesting aspects to this that oftentimes don't make sense and leave you like scratching your head, like what the heck is going on here? All right. So first of all, the bamboo cutter guy, he finds this tiny human looking thing. Now, I think depending on the version that you get, you might see it portrayed as a shining baby or a shining little tiny 9-centimeter adult. In
it's
the
also
Ghibli
the story
version,
of the first Pokemon, then.
The story of the first Pokemon.
Yeah,
it depends on how evolved she is.
Yeah, she was like a mini her, and then she evolved to a full-sized her.
Maybe. So Ghibli does. They did a 2013 like film version of this, and they do something very interesting in this. So the bamboo cutter guy finds a tiny 9-centimeter, like beautiful, like princess-looking woman, but after he takes her home, she suddenly reverts to a baby.
Huh.
And then they start taking care of the baby. And then they interpret that as a sign that they have to take care of it. And so they've been given this gift by the gods, and so they're going to take care of this baby.
Wouldn't it be great if they felt ripped off? Like, no, I wanted a tiny adult, not a baby.
It's like, well, yeah, I mean, you could charge, to look at this tiny little adult, but a baby's just a baby. Like, what's so special about a baby?
It's a baby.
Yeah.
They thought they finally found the woman Isunboshi, and then they just got some normal baby. I mean, it's a glow-in-the-dark baby, but still.
Isunboshi is another Japanese folktale, but involving it's like the Japanese equivalent of Tom Thumb, like a tiny little person.
Yeah, he's a tiny, but he stays tiny. Oh, no. Eventually he becomes big, but that's through magic. It's not like automatic.
Yeah. We can. Oh, there's so many interesting folktales, but yeah. Anyway, back to Kaguya Hime. So, I started looking into like classical Japanese versions of this story to try to get a more accurate idea of like the what the closest thing to the original was, and so I started watching a whole bunch of because the classical Japanese, I guess, is part of the Japanese curriculum for the kokugo, which is kind of like the Japanese language arts, and so kids are tested on this. They have to be able to understand like the classical Japanese version of Kaguya Hime, and so there's tons of Japanese YouTube videos of people explaining it. So I went down, I watched like a few hours of this probably. Very interesting stuff. But my point was that in these older versions, when he takes her back to the house, he ends up putting her in a little basket, or maybe like in a little like sort of insect cage to protect her, I guess.
I was hoping a jar like in Zelda.
I hope he cut holes at the top, because otherwise...
Link never does.
Yeah. Oh, Link is a cruel man. So apparently, because you can figure, right? Like a cat would sneak into the house and then eat the little person. You have to put it in a little cage. But anyway, so this Kaguya Hime, which in some versions of the story, it really implies like they named her this shining princess, is literally what it's called, or her full version of her name is Nayotake no Kaguya Hime, which is the shining princess of the supple bamboo.
Oh, I never thought of that. So the Hime is actually part of her name. She's not Kaguya with a suffix. Her name is Kaguya Hime.
Yeah. That's every version seems to just Kaguya Hime. That is who she is, and not.
If she had become royalty in some way, she would be Kaguya Hime Hime?
Yeah. Yeah. So, which brings it up another point of like, what do you think the people around this old man and old woman like thought of having like this baby that they called her like Princess Kaguya, and like that's like, man, they're very ostentatious, very like arrogant of them to name their child a princess. And this is supposedly back in like the Heian period where these ideas of nobility are like even far stronger than they are now. So it's weird.
This would be such a better story because the real story basically just time skips 20 years. Well, okay, it's medieval Japan. It's probably like 13 years knowing how they were. But like, what would it be like her just growing up with other like kids in the village and stuff?
Yeah, exactly.
Especially if she did literally glow. That would be awesome.
Yeah, in some version of the story, these older versions especially, it really seems like she is literally emanating light. Like some versions sort more emphasize it that like her beauty is shining, like in this sort of metaphorical sense. But other versions really seem to say like, no, she's just like a flashlight. She's like a firefly.
Yeah, I want to see like a story where she's like 8 years old and she's like pulling a prank on the townspeople with her friends and she just glows. No one thinks it's weird because they got used to it.
So, all right. So she grows up in the span of 3 months. She becomes like basically whatever the people of the time would consider an adult.
So about 12 or 13.
Yeah. Yes. Of marriageable age.
At this point in history, I think the average lifespan was like 40.
Maybe. But yeah, I mean, marriageable age was much, it wasn't that old.
Another to be fair, usually the guy marrying the girl was also around that age.
Yeah, well, although sometimes
maybe a
they were
little
quite
older,
a bit older.
but
yeah,
it's not like it's some 40-year-old or something because he'd be dead by then.
Another thing that happens is that the old man, in pretty much every version, seems to start finding gold in bamboo along the way, and so in the Ghibli film, they do something which to me made sense. They explain that the old man interprets this as a sign from the gods that he has to make her, he has to provide for her as if she were an actual princess. And so he decides to take her to the quote unquote Miyako, which is the capital. So I'm supposing Kyoto, takes her there and has her grow up like a princess and educates her like an actual princess. Whereas in the older versions, there's no explanation. They just say like, oh, he starts getting a bunch of money and okay, like, moving on. So he has a whole bunch of gold.
Can a peasant show up with gold and just like get into regal education centers? Did that work back then?
Yeah, that's another dubious kind of thing. Yeah. I don't know. Like in the Ghibli film, he hires like a private tutor kind of like woman to educate her on all these things. So I don't know how realistic that is, but anyway. So she grows up, she has her kind of coming of age ceremony. And then, of course, the guys in Japan start going crazy for her because she's so beautiful and everybody wants to marry her. And this culminates in kind of, I guess you would say this is the middle of the story. And it's this long chunk with guys basically asking for her hand in marriage. Ryan, would you mind explaining this part?
Okay, so specifically, 5 suitors show up, and Kaguya requests them to find difficult things, I guess, kind of like to prove themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, for example, one of them has to bring her the stone begging bowl of the Buddha.
Of the Buddha, yeah.
Of the Buddha,
yeah.
One has to bring a jeweled branch from the mythical island of Horai.
Yeah.
One has to bring a robe of Chinese fire rat skins.
Yeah, fire rats. I guess there's some kind of mythical animal. Right?
Yeah, China was a scary country, man. The rats were on fire, or breathed fire, or both.
Yeah.
One has to bring a colored jewel from a dragon's neck. Unfortunately, he did get the dragon jewel, but it wasn't the right color. That's me joking. I just think it's funny that, like, a colored jewel, as if, like, if you get a diamond from its neck, it doesn't count. And finally, one had to get a cowrie shell? I don't know.
Yeah.
Born from a swallow.
Yeah. So these were all like aristocrat nobles of the time. And an interesting thing here is that 3 of them in the stories are usually like basically real historical figures, like the names of actual nobles in Japan's history, like prior to this story. So I'm assuming like 900s or earlier, are used for these three characters, and then two usually are fictional names, but they're possibly based on actual real historical figures.
Yeah, someone that maybe they knew closer to that era, but today they have been forgotten to time.
Yeah. So there's theories on it, but anyway, people of the time that were educated, other aristocrats may have been able to identify, all these people, but to us, especially Westerners, maybe not so much. Maybe to some very, knowledgeable Japanese people, they might know who everybody is. But anyway, so
in old Japan, people had multiple names too, so they could have used a name that like isn't famous today, but maybe by a different name they are.
That's true. Yeah. Names were complicated. All right. So Kaguya Hime sends them off to get these. They say, "I'm not going to marry you unless you get these ridiculously hard to get things." And then what happens?
Basically, they don't.
Yeah.
So the first noble presents a fake stone bowl made from a blackened pot, but Kaguya Hime notices it's fake because it does not glow with holy light.
Yeah.
Which seems like the most obvious thing. If you're going to fake a Buddha bowl, you got to make it glow.
Yeah.
The second noble presents a branch created by the country's finest jewelers, but it is revealed when a messenger of the craftsman arrives at Kaguya Hime's house to collect a payment. So if he just paid his bill, he would have been fine.
Exactly, yeah. They were about to believe it.
A third noble is deceived by a merchant from China who sells him a robe that burns when it is tested with fire.
Yeah.
And the fourth noble sets out to find a dragon at sea, but abandons his plan after encountering a storm. That guy just gave up easily.
Yeah. Yep.
And the fifth noble falls from a great height while reaching into a swallow's nest. So he actually did it, but just died doing it.
Yep. So they all fail in various ways, and so Kaguya Hime does not marry any of them.
What if his ghost showed up with the shell? Like, I died, but look, I got it. Marry me.
Well, it's like, you're an alien, I'm a ghost, I think we can make this work.
I feel at that point she'd be like, well, you did die for me.
Yeah. So Kaguya Hime gets her way, apparently, because, these five aristocratic guys, like, they don't manage to win her consent. And then we get the emperor in a lot of versions. It seems like the emperor makes his appearance at this point. So usually it seems that the emperor hears about this beautiful woman that has rejected everyone. And so he sends a messenger, a retainer, someone to go check her out. And so the guy goes and he tries to see her, but he's rejected. And so then he goes back to the emperor, says like, hey, she didn't want to see me. And so then that gets him even more interested. And so he goes and he's ready to offer her to like marry him, become part of the like a concubine or whatever, like just join the court and give an office to the father or whatever. And so he goes, but
without ever having met her.
Yeah, never having met her, but of course he's the emperor, so he can do whatever he wants. And we're about to see an example of this. But usually it seems that in these older versions, the emperor says that he lies. He says, I'm going on a hunt. He doesn't actually tell the bamboo cutter father guy or Kaguya Hime that he's going to go visit them, because he knows that if he says that, then she's going to refuse. So he lies. He says he's going to go to a hunt nearby where they are. And so then he sneaks into the house and finds her. And in one version that I saw in Japanese, it was like she was literally shining light as he encountered her in the room. So then he goes over to her. Of course, he's enamored by her beauty and whatever. He goes over to her and he grabs her. And then, she's saying, no, I'm not going to go with you. I'm not going to marry you. And then she like vanishes, disappears, or turns like semi-translucent or something. And then he realizes like, oh, you are not a normal human being. Like, you are something special. Please come back. I want to see you. Just, I'm not gonna grope you again.
It's actually even worse. Like, you've read Genji Monogatari, like at least some of it, right?
I have not, but I've heard plenty of, I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, because Genji does very similar things that don't end with groping, and apparently that's how in their era royalty thought marriages worked.
Yes, so in the Ghibli version of this scene, It's exactly what we're talking about. He says something along the lines of like, "I'm the emperor. I can do whatever I want," as he's like grabbing her from behind.
Yeah.
So very, very rapey. So she reappears, and so then he decides to leave for that day. But of course, he's like stunned by her beauty. He has not given up on her, and so in many versions,
honestly, I'd be more interested in a teleporting girl. That'd be awesome.
Well, yeah, it would be certainly fascinating to get the backstory to that.
She's an X-Man.
She's like Kitty Pryde, right?
Well, she phases. Oh, maybe that's how she did it.
Yeah. In some, I think it was one English translation. It sounded like she was turned into kind of like a shadowy-ish figure, but again,
she might be a vampire if she turns into like a mist.
Oh, there's no scene of her trying to look at herself in the mirror, as far as I remember. So
Kitty Pryde is one of the best X-Men, though. So let's go with that.
Okay. So, so in the Japanese versions, especially in these classical Japanese versions, I usually see that 3 years then passes. We get a big time skip. And during that time, at the very least, the emperor has been sending her letters. But I also got the impression that Kaguya Hime was also sending him letters back. So, because they use the term bunsu, which usually is, I think to me, implies like they're exchanging letters back and forth.
It is unclear here, I think, though, because we were talking about this before recording, where it could be that she was slightly warming up to him, or it could be that she was just writing back, like, "Stop sending me your letters, leave me alone."
Yeah, it's certainly possible. And again, there's so many versions of this, but
yeah.
And this is, again, how we said, there's evidence or theories about who wrote this, but this is one of the scenes in which we get evidence for this, in that I think in some versions you actually see the letters that they exchange or parts of it. And so I guess they're writing poems to each other, like waka poems. And so, there's a couple parts in the story where you actually see poems. But anyway, so 3 years pass and they're exchanging letters, and the emperor hasn't given up on Kaguya Hime. But this is the part where we get to one day Kaguya Hime is looking at the moon and she starts crying, and the bamboo cutter and the old woman, his wife, they're like, what's up? What's going on? Why are you crying? And so then that's when she explains, well, you see, I'm actually from the moon, and on August 15th, on the night of August 15th, the moon people are going to come and get me. So I got to go. But I'm sad about this.
And I just know this.
Yeah, and so we get no indication of how she remembers this or finds out, or did she know this from the time she was a 9 centimeter adult, and was just hiding it the whole time? Like I
always kind of thought she was like dropped to Earth or something, but this makes it sound like they sent her there on some kind of mission with a plan.
Maybe, we don't know.
They had a scheduled pickup, I guess.
Yeah, that's the rendezvous point.
Because, like, I don't think it ever implies that, like, they sent her a message. She just, like, knows.
Nope. In no classical Japanese version that I saw, or, like, typical tellings, I never saw any sort of communication. So, I don't know. But what ends up happening in a lot of versions is that the emperor ends up sending soldiers to protect her, because she's voiced that she doesn't want to go back. The old man, the old woman don't want her to go back. He's still enamored with her, so he doesn't want her to go back. And
I will say, if I can like interject, from the versions I've read, so she definitely didn't like the 5 suitors. Sometimes she never marries the emperor. Sometimes she doesn't like him at all. But I think she always consistently likes her adoptive parents.
Yeah, I do see that. Yeah, I don't see any versions that were different from that. Yeah.
Yeah, so either she usually wants to stay because she's happy with her family. Yeah.
So, I mean, and come on. I mean, she is a 3-year, and 3-month-old at this point. So, she's very attached to her parents.
She's still she's still a toddler.
Yeah. So this is another part of these, like, did she have, like, the intellect of an adult from the point she was a baby? Or is she like a 3-year-old writing waka poetry?
And if she was a tiny adult who reverted into a baby, did she lose her intelligence, or was she just a very smart baby?
Exactly. Yeah. No clue, and we get no answers.
I hope it's smart baby, and immediately she's like, I regret this. I can't even walk under my own strength now. You, bamboo man, carry me to your home.
Yeah, exactly.
Give me milk.
So, All right, so we get the soldiers, right? So the emperor sends, in one version I saw 2,000 soldiers. And in the classical versions, I never see any indication that the old man like moves away. So maybe like he used the gold that he was getting like magically to like buy more property or something. I don't know, but there was enough space to have 2,000 men on the property somehow, like on the
They're
roof
just
of the
really
house.
cramped in his house.
Oh yeah, in one version it seems like they had them on the roof of the house, on the walls, and like everywhere. They were just packed with people.
They built a house out of the guards.
Exactly. They had guards on their guards. They were all like on
the guards were armed with other guards.
Yes. So the night of August 15th comes, and apparently it was in the hour of the rat. Go back to our hour of the ox episode to find out about the hours of the animals, but that's basically midnight. And so midnight, you get the Tenjin, which are the human, no, not human, the alien heaven people. They show up, and in these classical versions, they are described as floating down on a cloud and then floating 1.5 meters above the ground.
This reminded me of a funny joke I saw once.
Do you want to tell it?
Okay, it is completely unrelated to this.
Yeah.
But there's a website in Japan that's kind of like a meme site where people post like pictures and then like captions that are not what the picture's actually about, but stuff that's supposed to be funny.
Yeah.
And there's one that showed Buddha on a small cloud that just barely like went beyond his feet, kind of floating away from a Buddhist temple while two like priests run out. And like it's supposed to be they're excited to see Buddha and they're going to meet him. But the caption they put is like, "Stop him, he's stealing our Roomba."
I love that.
And it looks like a little circular disc he's like riding away from them.
It's so good. Oh, thank you for sharing that. One of these YouTube videos that explains the classical Japanese was explaining this scene, and he says it's like Kintoon, which is Goku's flying cloud.
Yeah, flying Nimbus,
Ball.
I think in English. Kito.
Yeah, flying Nimbus. Yeah, in Dragon Ball. I mean, that's really what it sounds like. They float down on this on this little cloud.
It doesn't make that sound.
Yeah, it makes that same sound. Yeah. And they're just floating there, and it's not clear how many of these alien heaven people are there, but from the sounds of it, it's at least 2, 3, if not several more. And in a few of these classical Japanese versions, one person is described as a person that looks like a king. So probably, I guess he's the king of the Tsukino
He just
Miyako.
wore a t-shirt that said king on it.
It's like, it's got an arrow pointing up and it says, "I'm the king."
Yeah.
And then the guy next to him has an arrow pointing left on his shirt and says, "He's the king."
Yes, it's exactly that.
Oh my goodness. All right. So, so there's a bunch of these moon people on this cloud. And
We need to make like an animation of this.
God, I would love to see that. And there's all these soldiers, and depending on the interpretation, like sometimes they fall asleep, or sometimes they just are unable to move. Like there's these really, really strong-willed guys that they pull at their arrow to try to like shoot the moon people, but they can't. They give up, and so all the soldiers basically they can't do anything. They're powerless.
So when we make our animation, there'll be a dark turn here, and suddenly their heads all start to explode.
It's like Fist of the North Star. And the old man, in one classical version that I was looking, he starts like basically like begging. He's like, "Please, please, please, don't make her go." And so this is when the king starts to explain like Kaguya Hime tsumi. She the word used is a tsumi, which usually I think is translated as sin, but in a more broad sense, you might interpret it as crime, or basically she did something wrong. And so she was sent down to this dirty mortal plane as a form of punishment. And she was sent to be with this poor old man, like, he doesn't have money or anything, to basically be in this tainted world. We never get any concrete information about what the heck she did wrong. But this is basically the most common explanation offered about why the heck Kaguya Hime ended up on Earth, right? I also saw another explanation that involved some sort of celestial war, and she was sent down like, I don't know, like Superman to like be safe or something. But
Oh, really? I never heard that version.
yeah, but I tried looking in Japanese for this, and I couldn't find any evidence of that. So maybe this is something that only pops up in English versions. I'm not clear on that. But the most common one is about she did something wrong and she was sent out.
In our version, it's going to be she's like a revolutionary trying to overthrow their like moon hierarchy. And it's a very pro-feminist one. Once she goes back, she does it again and succeeds.
Yep. And then she wears the t-shirt that says I'm the king.
Yeah, that's the final scene is her putting on the king t-shirt.
the t-shirt
the final scene is she makes the other king put on the shirt with an arrow pointing up saying, "Not the king."
I want to see art of this. Anyway, so
it's like a really like crappy t-shirt like you'd find in like a what do you call them, souvenir shop in like Las Vegas or something for like $3. It's just like bright lime green.
I was thinking just a plain white t-shirt, just a ratty shirt. Anyway, so he explains that, but obviously it's of no avail. She has to leave, and she's sad. The parents are sad, but she asks for a moment to write a letter. And in one version I saw, like she writes a letter to the parents as well, but usually it seems to be that the letter is for the emperor. And the impression that I got is that the emperor isn't even there. Like she gives the letter to some lieutenant of his and then he takes it back. So he's a coward. I mean, he's not even there for the big night. Like he's just back at home and
I mean,
waiting.
Heian heir emperor, in these 3 years, he probably found like 4 other wives.
Well, he probably already had 4 wives too. And so then there's this one scene where one of these Tenjin, one of these like heaven people give he tells her, or maybe she, I'm not clear, but this moon person takes out this immortality elixir, fushi no kusuri in Japanese, and he says, "Here, drink this. You've been in this tainted world. Like this will make you feel better." Something along those lines. So she usually takes like a sip, but then she puts it away, and that and the letter end up being passed along to the emperor. And there's also this one other very important thing, which is this robe. It's called the hagoromo. And apparently when you wear this, you lose your ningen no kokoro, which is like your human heart mind. You lose all recollection of your memories and your kind of like human emotions. And you become, I guess, like in a way, like enlightened. However, they seem to become these kind of like cold, heartless beings as well.
This is what she overthrows in her revolution.
Yeah. She's like, emotions are good. Let's be happy or something. I don't know. So anyway, so the moon person tries to get her to put this on, but that's when she says like, wait, let me write this letter. And then the moon person is like, come on, hurry up. Eventually she puts on the robe after she's written the letter, passed on the immortality elixir, and then they fly off on their little cloud. And then in one version I saw like the old man and the old woman are totally distraught. They're like crying in bed, and that's like the last scene for them. We never know like really what happens with them.
Yeah, because some dude just stole their daughter.
Yeah, they're just totally heartbroken. And so then cut to that epilogue that I mentioned before. The emperor is distraught because he didn't get his prize, his woman, I guess. And he asks one of the his retainers or whatever, his priests or something. I don't know if it was a priest, but like, what is the tallest mountain in Japan? And so he says this place in different name back then, but it's in Shizuoka.
Old name Shizuoka.
Yeah, old name Shizuoka, whatever. So
Q Shizuoka.
Yeah. It was like Sasada or something. I forgot. But
I don't
anyway,
remember.
So the emperor says, take this letter and take this immortality elixir, which I have not partaken of. Take it and burn it. So he sends like tons of soldiers up the mountain, and they burn the elixir and the letter. And it is said that you can still see the smoke emanating from the mountain to this day. And that mountain is, what do you think, Ryan?
Oh, we're making it a mystery? Well, I don't know. Is there a mountain that has a name like Fushi?
Fushi? Yeah, Fushi.
Fushiyama.
Fushiyama, yeah. That mountain got called Fushiyama. No, well, obviously the story is that the mountain got called Fuji.
Yeah,
Fuji-san,
Fuji.
right? Mount Fuji.
Chi and Ji are kind of interchangeable when they become kanji.
Yeah. And the kanji for present day Mount Fuji uses two kanji. One is can also be read tomo, but it can mean like abundance or wealth. And then the other one, it's kind of like man, or I guess you could loosely interpret it as soldiers, as in this case, because the theory is that the Fushi, which literally in this story, right, we're talking about immortality, not death, are the kanji, turned into Fuji, which using the kanji for an abundance of soldiers, because the emperor sent a whole bunch of soldiers, and then this was, I guess, more auspicious kanji, and the smoke that is still emanating from there, I guess, is still emanating from the mountain because it was the immortality elixir was burnt, and the emperor was too distraught. Like, if I can't live with Kaguya Hime, I'm not going to drink this. I'm going to burn it at the places closest to heaven, so she gets the message, and thus Mount Fuji's name. Blah.
The implication, I think, is because it's the like eternal drink, it'll just burn forever. Like, it doesn't burn out.
Yeah. So that is really the fuller version.
I've heard historians do not think that is how the name came about at all.
No, I don't think it involved immortality elixirs. So,
well, I mean, not even that the story's true. I don't think they think it was named after the story, because I'm pretty sure it already had a name long before the story, especially if this was like in 900 AD.
Exactly.
Japan would have already been like around 1200 years old, and to just not name that mountain would be strange.
Yeah. So there's many theories about the etymology that do not involve this. This is a famous story, and many people know this. But there's various theories, including one theory that involves it's actually derived from the Ainu language, because I think Fuchi means fire, something along those lines. Now there's another person that said the phonetically that doesn't work out, and so there's debate and there's various theories, and you can read all about
word
that.
Plus 1,000 years equals anything phonetically works out.
It's certainly possible, exactly, but we have no concrete evidence to know that it was exactly one way or the other, and I certainly don't think that somehow this sort of Kaguya Hime thing ended up.
I think that little thing was something that like parents or grandparents would add on to tell their kids, like a cool little tie-in to then times modern day Japan. They'd be like, oh, that's why it's named Fuji, but that's not actually the historical thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So, all right. So we have a good idea of the story, both the short version and the long version. Let's take a break, and then we're going to start to get into a few more of the inconsistencies, weird parts, and of course, all the alien stuff. Hey, so just a few quick things here before we get back into the rest of the episode. First of all, if you want to support the show and maybe you're going to be doing some Amazon shopping in the near future, then why not use the Amazon affiliate link for japankyo.com? It's very easy to remember, japankyo.com/Amazon. So if you can't become a patron, then this is another way you can support the show. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and a few pennies, just a tiny percentage of whatever you purchase, makes its way over here so that I can do things like pay for hosting and pay for hosting and pay for hosting. So, of course, I have to pay for hosting for the podcasts and the website. And I'm also working on a few other projects all related to japankyo.com. Some very exciting stuff, but this stuff does cost money. So if you want to make sure that I can keep doing this kind of thing and you enjoy my content, then consider using japankyo.com/Amazon to do your Amazon shopping, or check out the Patreon, or just, hey, why not subscribe, rate and review, and tell a friend about the show. All that stuff helps the show keep on growing and maybe brings in new listeners that use those links and go to Patreon and blah, blah, blah. All right. So keep all that stuff in mind. If you enjoy the show, there are various ways for you to support it. And don't forget to check out the latest episode of my other podcast, Japan Station. Episode 66 just came out a few days ago, and that one features an interview with Hannah from the very popular YouTube channel, Miss Hanake. So Hannah produces content in Japanese. She's a very, very skilled Japanese speaker, just excellent Japanese, and she's been producing content for over 10 years, and she's currently at Oxford working on her master's degree in Japanese studies, and we talk about all that kind of stuff, linguistic research and YouTube and a few other things. So go check that out at japanstationpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so back to the show.
Welcome back.
Yes. So
I beat him to the punch.
Yes, you did. So let's talk about the alien stuff. So of course, the whole premise of this episode, right, it comes from is this a story about an alien visiting Earth that then had to return to the moon or whatever its planet? Is this some kind of evidence of that? Some people say it is. Some people joke that it is. But let's discuss a few things that people have said related to this, and a few things that people have done to explore this alien topic of Kaguya Hime. So perhaps one of the highest budget explorations of this is the 1987 film that in Japanese I think it's just called Taketori Monogatari, but in English I think it's called the Princess of the Moon. I think that's the English translation. But so this was a big budget live action film in 1987 by Fuji and Toho. I think it was a co-production. For example,
a theatrical release.
Yeah, this was a major thing. Ichikawa Kon was the director. He's a respected director, especially at the time. Very prolific. Toshiro Mifune, which he was in a bunch of Akira Kurosawa films.
If you've seen one, he's definitely in it.
Yeah, he's the guy. Of course, Seven Samurai. He's the guy with the long sword, the peasant guy. So super famous guy. Another famous actress ends up playing Kaguya Hime, super famous at the time, especially known for being a beautiful actress, very talented too. Anyway, but the whole idea behind this live action production is let's portray this as a science fiction tale, and let's clearly show that Kaguya Hime is an alien that had to go back to the moon. And I hadn't seen this, but I did find a clip on YouTube, which is the last scene. And Ryan, could you explain what happens in this last scene?
Yeah, so it's only the last 5 minutes, so we didn't have a lot of context, but it begins with them floating upwards to a literal gigantic UFO.
Yep.
Something out of, what is it called? Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Honestly, it's so huge, you could even say something similar to Independence Day.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of shots of it, they kind of go into a glowing light, and then it has a little, a spiral closing door thing?
Mm-hmm.
Like you see in sci-fi stuff, and then it starts to fly away.
Yeah.
And one thing that struck me that I don't know what's going on, again, we didn't have the context, it shoots a little energy ball out that flies around and seems to go down to a village. And for some reason, a girl just looks up and goes Otsuki-sama, which is the moon.
Yeah.
And I have no idea why she does that.
I don't know.
Or what the little fireball means. But yeah, then it just flies away.
Yep.
And I think the one old lady's oh, this couldn't have happened. We must have been imagining it or something, calling it Maboroshi.
Yeah. And then I'm not sure if that was Toshiro Mifune. I can't remember, but I think it probably was him. But he says something there's so many things that
there's things we don't understand that we must learn about, or something like that. Yeah. So this thing was high budget for the time, major production. I think it won Japanese Academy Awards for set design or something like that, costume. But it was very poorly reviewed because it was the script was just not that great, and it the dialogue was very long-winded, very much exposition for the sake of exposition. I will say the 5 minutes I saw did not make me want to see the rest.
Yeah, I did.
It felt very TV movie-ish, which is why I'm kind of surprised it was a theatrical release.
Yeah. And I don't know what again, I don't know more than basically what I just explained, but on IMDb I did look at the characters, and Kaguya Hime's name was also listed as Kaya, which makes me think that as before she becomes the alien moon princess, her name was Kaya. So maybe the parents gave her a different name, and then she ends up becoming Kaguya Hime. In the Ghibli film, interestingly enough, the parents call her Hime, but then when it comes time for her to become an adult, one of the nobles or whatever comes for her coming of age ceremony thing and gives her the name Nayotake no Kaguya Hime. And so that's when she becomes the full name. But even though she already was being called Hime as a baby. So I don't know. Different stories do that differently. But yeah, back to the alien thing. So there's also, for example, one YouTube video that I found where people were discussing this. It was two Japanese female YouTubers discussing this, and they do this whole interpretation, which I thought was fun. But of course, back in the day, if you're talking about Heian period, if you have a bamboo cutter, all of a sudden come across some sort of tiny shining person, they might interpret this as some sort of magic. But what if it's a crashed spaceship, and so some of the parts are still shining, and the person had to be shrunk down, kind of like in a sort of cryo sleep sort of thing, where they have to be shrunk down to conserve energy due to a long time in a spaceship. And so then they were shrunk down, but then as they were taken back, then they end up becoming, big again, because they're reverting back from that sort of shrunken state. And so then the whole point of Kaguya Hime asking the 5 suitors for these ridiculous things is because she needs those things to rebuild her spaceship and spacesuit in order to go back to her planet.
That's kind of stretching, because she specifically says she's from the moon, which wouldn't require cryo sleep.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Maybe she didn't mean that moon.
Oh, there is no definite article in Japanese.
Yeah, she's from a moon.
She's from a moon, yeah. She's not she never said Arutsuki, but she didn't have to. To her, it was the moon, so implicitly, she didn't have to say Arutsuki.
Or maybe she thought people of that era wouldn't understand other solar systems, so she's just like, yeah, it's like that moon you got up there, but
that's
farther.
True. That is very true. Yeah.
I'm curious, at what point Japanese people, historically, realized the moon was planet-like? Because I know, old times, people often thought the sun and moon were just celestial things. Yeah. Because this is a very long time ago, by the way. We're thinking 800 AD.
Yep.
Anyway, I don't know.
Well, that's a very good point. And it's really, really interesting in that the moon people are described as Tenjin.
Yeah.
Right? Which is heaven people.
They're not Skijin or Getsujin?
Getsujin. I don't know. But they're described... So the moon is just part of heaven, I guess. That's the implication, right?
Yeah.
They're not calling it Wakusei, which would be a planet of some kind.
Wakuseitsuki.
Moon. And there's a really interesting thing here too, that there are these kind of Buddhist, sometimes they're called nymphs or heavenly beings that are called Tennin or Tenyo. Tenyo is the kanji for woman. And they are depicted as oftentimes being very, very beautiful. And that weird kimono thing, cloak that I mentioned earlier that made her forget everything. They are also called hagoromo, and these tennin are also described to be wearing the hagoromo.
So you're saying that's their spacesuit?
Well, I wasn't saying that, but you could interpret it that way. What I was saying is that they are using imagery and terminology that seems to be related to this other already existing thing that derives from Buddhism and these kind of deities in Buddhism. So, yeah, they're not using the language of science or science fiction. Let's put it that way.
I will say, the very first time I read this, when I had no idea what it was, it did seem like her country was not literally the moon in space, but just heaven. She came from the land where angels and stuff would live.
Yeah. I think, well, obviously a person of the time would have some interpretation of it being something like that, because they're not going to be thinking science fiction like we are.
Yeah. Until they see the giant spaceship.
Until they see the giant spaceship, yeah. Okay, so speaking of another spaceship. So this one is just a really random kind of thing that ends up connecting to Kaguya Hime in this weird way. But apparently there was this Apollo 2007 YouTube internet hoax that states that Apollo 18, 19, and 20 were secret NASA missions, because Apollo 17 was the last one. And during Apollo 20, the astronauts, which was apparently a joint venture between the former Soviet Union and America, they find a spaceship in a dark side of the moon in a crater. And inside this spaceship, there is a moon alien mummy that got dubbed Mona Lisa. But when you look into this in Japanese, some people, maybe joking around. Some people may be super serious. I don't know. They say, or maybe she's Kaguya Hime. Now, obviously, this was debunked, but it's just a fun thing that some Japanese YouTubers still kind of, did you know about this? And when you look it in Japanese, you look it up in Japanese, you see these kinds of videos.
Yeah, that was a weird video.
Yeah, yeah, I will include a video for that in the show notes. But ultimately, I do want to discuss what do we really think about this? But and I have a couple of interesting theories here, because the story is so disjointed that it really kept me thinking for a couple of weeks now. Like, what's the deal with the story? But first of all, let's discuss the question. So
I mean,
Ryan,
imagine literally like nonstop for 3 weeks. You were just like, what is up with this story? I can't sleep.
It kind of, well, I could sleep, but man, I dug way too deep into this. So yeah, Ryan, what do you think? Is this proof is this like those ancient aliens things where we can say like, oh, this is proof that aliens came to Japan in like 900 or whatever?
Well, considering from the very beginning this was supposed to be a fictional folk story, no.
Exactly. Yeah.
No one ever took this as a true story, I don't think, in any part of Japanese history.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe like a 5-year-old hearing it might think it was true, but no one else did.
Yeah.
This was designed to be like a fairy tale.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so, but that brings me to the thing that I want to discuss here. In that, yes, I agree with you that it's not aliens. I'm not saying that aliens don't exist. I'm just saying that we can't say that this is proof that aliens.
Yeah, you could argue this is the first science fiction story if you go with that interpretation. But I believe from the very beginning, this was designed to be fiction told to kids for fun.
Yeah, I certainly think that is open to interpretation. You can make that argument, and that's fine. That's totally fine. Because, like I said. And what I wanted to discuss here is that this story makes no sense in a way. Like it's called, like we said, the story of the bamboo cutter, but it's not really about him. Then we have Kaguya Hime like not wanting to marry anyone, but we don't really know why. And then all of a sudden she reveals that she has to go back to the moon. Again, we don't know why. And
in many versions, she's like very anti-emperor, but then suddenly friendly to the emperor, just completely out of the blue.
Yeah. And exactly. And then the emperor comes along, and to me, this whole like epilogue part of the story really seems tacked on. Like it doesn't connect directly to the story in any significant way, right? Like when we dissect a story nowadays, right? We try to think about like, what does this story teach us? Like, what is the takeaway of this story? And this could be in a movie, in a novel, in a comic book, whatever. And I can't give you a simple answer to this story. Like, what does it teach us?
Yeah, I think the issue with the disjointed and lack of a point is a lot of these traditional folktales don't actually have like a singular author. Like one person came up with it, and they often are passed down orally, and people just kind of like add their own things to it as it goes.
Yeah. So
you end up with a lot of kind of oddly connected things that don't make a lot of sense when you really think about it.
Exactly. So one argument, like there's multiple themes and things that are here that don't always connect. But for example, one interpretation could be that Kaguya Hime is, the moon is a metaphor for kind of the more rural part of Japan. And the other way around. The moon is the capital, the sort of imperial palace, and Kaguya Hime is banished because banishment was a serious punishment in Japan. And so, she's kind of coming to terms with this, and but again, it starts to fall apart, especially when you get to like the emperor stuff and all that kind of stuff. But then another interpretation is that it's some kind of criticism of the nobility. So, for example, one thing I was reading in Japanese is that it was criticizing the Fujiwara clan. So at the time, they were in power, and so when you present these sort of foolish nobles trying to get her hand in marriage, but all failing in stupid ways a lot of times, it's kind of a criticism of the nobility. But then again, like you get to the point of the emperor and you go like, well, then he butts his head into the story. And then like, how does he contribute to either message? He doesn't. And so my kind of theory is that the emperor part of the story was just kind of tacked on at some later point, because of course the emperor would take notice of this. Of course, you're trying to make sense of this story. You're trying to give the emperor some sort of, important role, because maybe at the time, if you were to write not do that. Maybe, that looks bad on you because the emperor is the emperor. And so to me, like this whole epilogue part with the emperor coming in, just, I don't know, to me, it seems tacked on like after the fact, almost like a retcon sort of thing.
Yeah, it is weird that all the other suitors had some kind of task, but the emperor doesn't. She just says no.
Yeah. And then like this whole like Mount Fuji thing, like, again, this seems like such a tacked on thing. Like, it's like,
the emperor would know what Fuji is by this point in history.
Yeah. Like it really, I mean, the only way that if this was one cohesive story, then it seems like the author tried to come up with a way to explain the name of Mount Fuji, but it's such a convoluted and disjointed story that to me, it doesn't make sense. Sorry. Yeah. So
except for the interpretation where she's the revolutionary who goes back to the moon and overthrows it and gets the kingdom t-shirt, right? You're okay with that one?
Of course. That is the only one that I accept.
It's completely coherent and just answers all of our questions.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So, all right. So I enjoyed looking into this story, and I still think it's a fun story to like think about and wonder about because there's so much that we don't know about this. I'm sure there is plenty more. Like if we had access to the original version, maybe we could find out so many more mysteries, like why the heck she was sent to the Earth, but we don't. We'll never know probably. So
she committed a crime and got exiled.
But then, like, why did she get accepted? Like, what did she do that warranted?
I thought that actually, I think it's trying to be explained, like, kind of like a prison term. She did something bad in the heavens, so she was sentenced to a 3 or 4 year, whatever it was, term on the Earth.
One I looked this up in Japanese, of course, and one person, I guess was some kind of message board or something. They were asking, like, what do you think the message of this story is? And, oh no, this was an article that I read, in Japanese. And this interpretation just was like, no. The guy was explaining, and I'm pretty sure it was a guy, but that the story teaches women to reject men very clearly because women these days are very vague when they reject men. And so you have to reject them very clearly.
She wasn't clear, though. She said she would marry them if they did the task.
Yeah, she was totally not clear. Yeah.
Honestly, I like a lot of these like old traditional stories, and you can't approach them thinking they have a story to teach you because they often don't. They literally were just made by people. Like, I honestly think these are made by like parents and grandparents just to tell a fun story to their kids. They don't have a lesson or a moral.
See, so that brings up another point that there's suggestions that perhaps this was based on earlier themes, and often, I mean, no story is created in a vacuum, right? There's certain things that pop up, like the babies, for example, we were talking about.
Yeah, finding babies just randomly skewing about nature.
Yeah, the Kaguya Hime was not the first story to do this, even though maybe it's the oldest one that survives in Japan. So maybe there were these ideas that were compiled into a written story by a male aristocrat of the Heian period, and that became the original written version. But there were already things going on in, maybe he heard something somewhere that he adapted. So we don't know. We just don't know. And so, that's why you end up with these sorts of things. Like, what I wanted to say is that when you look at it from the modern point of view, this is a badly written story. This is just a horrible, horrible story that answers nothing, confuses you, and you have very little, what the heck is the takeaway? But it's not a modern story, and it's not written in a modern way, and it's still a fun thing to explore and think about and talk about for what I think this episode is going to be over an hour long. If it wasn't interesting, we wouldn't be able to talk about it this long, right? So
now we're moving on to part 2 of our 5-part discussion about that story.
Yes, this is the Kaguya Hime epic.
This is the intro. We're just explaining the basics before we really get into it.
Yes. So I think we should leave it at that. But I do have what I want to do now is I want to end the episode. But for the patrons, I want to just add an extra little thing at the end where I'm going to talk about my Avengers Endgame theory of Kaguya Hime. So
was this a patron goal?
This is for anybody that's a patron. They're going to get to listen to the extra bonus bit. And I'm going to discuss how this relates to Avengers Endgame in that. All right, so we're going to end this part of the episode. If you want us to talk about other Japanese folktales, send me an email to ichimon@japankyo.com. Let me know which one you want us to discuss. There's tons of interesting Japanese folktales. Otherwise, please subscribe, tell a friend. If you have any friends that love Kaguya Hime, send them this. Check out the Ghibli movie. At least I enjoyed it. I mean, I watched it right before I started recording this. I definitely enjoyed it. But anyway, I think we're Ryan, unless you have anything else, we'll leave it at that.
Oh, no, I'm good. See you guys all next time. I'm just excited to hear this Avengers Endgame theory.
All right, patrons, stay tuned. Non-patrons, go to japankyo.com/Patreon to sign up for as little as $1 a month, and you'll get to hear the Avengers Endgame Kaguya Hime theory. All right, thanks for listening. Bye.